Good morning. This is Ask George after England's second Test victory in Multan that seals a pretty famous series victory. Morning. Nice to have an early start. Well, nice to have an early finish rather, and an early start to this.
It's nice to have an early finish. Yeah, it's brilliant. A really fun game. Look, I thought England got a wee bit lucky with an umpiring decision today, but on the balance of the whole game and the whole series, they've done fantastically well, and it's a significant achievement. Feels sort of like an historic win.
Absolutely. Let's chuck one at you straight away from someone who's got a point to make to you, I think. PL says, last year you said, I'm assuming you as you and not me, changing the captain, coach, selector would not really make a difference. Were you wrong?
Broadly, yes. I did say that. I think I said that the problems in English cricket were far too deep for sort of cosmetic level changes at the top. And I think that the results pretty much shown that I was wrong and that Rob Key was right. And he made a point of saying that in a press conference, actually, very early on, well, probably his first. I like Rob. There's nothing nasty about it at all. But he said, you're very negative about this team at the moment, and I think they're a lot better than you do. And I think largely he's been proved right. There are some caveats to that, of course. The end of COVID restrictions is a massive change. And I still feel bad for the likes of Chris Silverwood and Ashley Giles, who I still think were given an impossible job. I don't think that McCullum and Stokes necessarily would have taken on the role in those circumstances, but it would have been very difficult to win in Australia under those protocols and the pathetic amount of preparation that England had. And yes, obviously there are still some issues in English cricket. I don't think anyone thinks the structure is designed to optimise the development of players. Of course it isn't, but they found a way to surmount all those challenges. The transformation has been incredible, and very often it's a delight to be proved wrong, and they've done it. So it's a completely fair question. They were right and I was wrong.
There's a nice question about that transformation, actually. So Lord and Zoni asks, how good would Moeen be in this team? And what other players from the last 10 years would have flourished under Stokes and Baz?
Really interesting question. Moeen, Adil Rashid probably as well. Do you know James Vince is an interesting one, isn't he? I suspect he may have really, really flourished. He is one of the ones that I feel got away a bit. Maybe Gary Balance. Going back before that, Ian Bell would have been interesting, wouldn't he? But he had a terrific career anyway. KP, they had terrific careers. But what would have happened to Alistair Cook? What would have happened to Dom Sibley? I just don't know. I guess presumably they would have been replaced by some of the people we've just spoken about.
I guess the short answer is probably that everyone would flourish in what, by all accounts, is an environment where everyone's just empowered to be them with, I guess, sort of less talk about consequence and more talk about execution of, the way that you play. And I guess if you put it like that, I mean, it's hard to think of someone who wouldn't, they might not flourish into Test grades, they might not be long-term in the team, but it's hard to think that you wouldn't give a better representation of yourself in a team that, by all accounts, sort of makes it very easy to be yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that Chris Silverwood and Trevor Bayliss made it terribly difficult for people. They're very.
No, as you say, the pandemic probably did. Certainly on the women's side of it, speaking to Jonathan Finch, their director of cricket, last couple of weeks ago, and he was pretty open. So they probably made decisions during the pandemic that were conservative, that weren't, I guess, conducive to the way they want to play, because they were conscious that that you can only really enjoy. It's much easier to go and enjoy playing if you are enjoying being there. As we said earlier about Silverwood and Giles, to take that England team to Australia in the conditions they did, you've got to be able to embrace an Ashes series, don't you? You don't want to be looking, be counting down the days from day one.
I honestly think that their no moaning culture worked against them a little bit in a funny way, because perhaps people didn't realise how rubbish it was for them, and it really was. And of course it wasn't just the Ashes. The Ashes came on the end of lots of other things. There were months and months and months of pretty difficult times when they hadn't seen as much of their family as they would have liked, times when it was just hard to train even. So I don't think they did give themselves. I don't think they did themselves justice. But yeah, it's really interesting, that question.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it the other way around as well. Who would have, Dom Sibley's an interesting because he's clearly one of the top order batters in English cricket, but it does feel that he's Betamax in the age of, DVD, let alone just VHS. And how you reinvent yourself with those skills. Honestly, would Alistair Cook's career have been entirely different? I just don't know. But I guess
it's interesting because those guys. So Cook has got a very decent List A record, and Sibley, when he went back to the Championship after being dropped, came back with a lot more shots. So not that he didn't have them before, but perhaps just felt, I don't know, less pressure. Haseeb Hamid's another one, I guess, isn't he? Guys who traditionally are considered blockers, but if you put them in an environment where they're, Hamid had a really good Royal London Cup last year. I think, I don't know. I'd be fascinated. I'm with you. It's a really interesting question. It'd be fascinating to watch those guys in this team because I suspect they'd be fine. I thought
they're still good players, definitely. The same with all those guys. They're all still good players, and it wouldn't be a complete surprise if Hamid, in particular, got back in because he obviously did well for the Lions recently. So, let's see. I mean, there's lots of tests to come, aren't there? In the next 18 months, they go to India and they play an Ashes at home. So there'll be lots of opportunities for this method to be tested. But I think whatever happens, it's been a fantastic transformation. And it has changed English cricket. We were very much down in the dumps a few months ago, and now there's a real sense of excitement and joy about it. And I bet you that more people are watching, more people are tuning in, more people are setting their alarms early, and that stuff matters.
You touched on the controversial dismissal earlier. Sahih Mittal asked, "Is it time to end the soft signal concept of closed caps?" I'm not actually sure that's relevant here.
No, I think that's a misunderstanding. The soft signal was in place.
Yes.
So that you didn't in the past, you didn't overrule the on-field umpire unless there was a clear choice. Now that's not the case at all. The TV umpire decides, and the soft signal is only if the technology fails. So I was a bit surprised it was given out, but I didn't think it was an absolutely terrible decision. It was just probably a 60-40. I probably wouldn't have given it out, but in the grand scheme of things, you see many, many more controversial decisions than that. There's certainly no question that anyone was cheating or anything like that. It was just, I was a little bit surprised, but you could look at that 100 times.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have an absolutely firm decision either way. I was just a little bit surprised that you got that.
I guess the surprise, as much as anything, comes from how rarely those decisions, those are upheld. Especially now that as a third umpire, you've sort of got blank canvas to make that call yourself. It's so rare that they are. I guess the safe move is always to say is to go with not out there, isn't it? But I guess don't know if that's where the surprise came from.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, Nick. But also, I wonder if England might have just found a way anyway. I mean, there's something about this side. They seem to have huge confidence and belief, and that they seem to expect they're going to win. So, as you say, who knows? But it didn't. I hope that's not. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it in one of the first things I said because I don't think it's that important. I don't. I just, umpiring decisions are part of the rough and smooth of the game, and that wasn't an absolute shocker. It maybe wasn't a decision I'd have made, but that happens a lot.
And very finally for you, David Thomas asked, with the series decided, should England play Rayan Ahmed in the third test?
I don't think you give out caps for fun. I think that you would want to get to Karachi and have a look at the conditions first of all. I mean, bearing in mind how little Will Jacks bowled, and despite the predominant dominance of left-handers in that middle order, you wonder about his position in the side. There's a lot to decide before you make that decision. There's a lot of data to take in. You look at the pitch, you look at the ability of the bowlers in particular to recover. Some of them have been playing back-to-back. I would personally be tempted at the moment to send Ben Stokes home and give him an extra rest, but I don't suppose he'll want to do that. But given how important he is to the team, his mental freshness is vital. And he's been on the road a while. It's a month since he was playing a match-defining innings in the T20 World Cup final. So there are all sorts of things you could do. And if Rayan came into the side, that would be a lot of fun as well. But you don't give test caps away, and early selection isn't always the massive bonus that you would think. So I'd have some, but increasingly I look at what's happening in English cricket and all my conservative, cautious views. I have to be challenged, and as I say, it's been lovely to be shocked in the last few months and be pleasantly surprised by the limits of what's possible in Test cricket, because I have been shocked.
As you say, though, chucking in a young spinner to a dead rubber test, albeit normally the other way around in England's case, I mean, is not new. Is not new, is it? I mean, and as you say, it doesn't often have. I can't really think of a time when it's worked.
Well, I think we're still waiting for Scott Borthwick and Mason Crane's second cap.
Well, you could throw back to throughout in 22 years. Chris Schofield was sort of the first of the millennium, at least, wasn't he, to be thrown in young on a bit of a whim, and then sort of knows.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was a dead rubber though. I think it was the start of the summer.
But at least the leg spinner, at least a young leggy thrown in. Yeah, exactly, Creighton. I think what I always found what's interesting with, especially particularly Creighton, I think Ryan as well, if he was to play next week, is you're effectively 10, 12 years away from these guys' peaks. And the real shame, I mean, spoke to Mason about this actually before, is that the real shame would be if his international career was sort of defined by 5 days, potentially a decade and a half before he was, at his best. And that's, as I say, that's the risk. But equally, as you've seen over this sort of last 6 months, I mean, they won't just challenge convention. They'll back. I guess there'd be no better time to be given an opportunity than in this side.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair.
But equally, Matt Parkinson had 2/3 of the game, didn't he? So
there's a lot to like about Mason Crane still. I think when we did that podcast with Talk Sport, he was my one to watch in the summer or something, which proved to be nonsense. But again, but I do think he's a really exciting cricketer who does lots of things that might fit in with the look of this side. One of the most remarkable things about this series is how little role the spinners have played. I mean, I think Leachy's taken his wickets at 57 or so each. And Joe Root took the new ball. I mean, there are all sorts of amazing things happened. I mean, that was one of the Stokes punts that didn't work, wasn't it? But
it didn't last long, did it?
No,
Leach was in the attack pretty quickly.
No, but it's partly because he knew he had other options, wasn't it? I mean, Mark Wood is. I just wonder how we're going to look back on Mark Wood's career, because increasingly he seems like such an important figure in the history of English cricket. I suspect he's the fastest bowler England have ever had, certainly consistently. He's now played a part in 2 World Cup wins and some of these incredibly memorable Test wins. Always hard to replace. How do you replace him? He's like he might be the Graham Swan of his age, because I think Graham Swan was probably, for all the incredible skill of KP and what have you, Swan was probably the hardest to replace from that England team. And I wonder if Mark Wood might be from this one, but hopefully, Jofra Archer comes back and has, a decade of bowling rockets in front of him as well.